Hi, everybody. Midnight Media Capture is back with you tonight on Wednesday. Here we are, Midnight Media Capture, and our Wednesdays with Arlen Schumer series. We are so excited to have Arlen. Hi, Arlen.
Hey, Nicole.
Midnight Media Capture is midnightmediacapture.com. Myself, Nicole Franklin, and Giovanna Aguilar, who is live with us tonight from Ecuador. So we are global tonight.
You guys are like my Lois Lane and Lana Lang tonight, with me being your Clark Kent slash Superman.
Okay, I love it. Which
Yeah,
one's Lois and which one's Lana?
well, you're the dark hair, so you're Lois, Nicole, and Giovanna is Lana Lang on special mission in, South America.
Very cool. I like that. I'll take that.
Like that?
Well,
Either that or you're Betty and Veronica of my wildest dreams.
oh my, we'll leave it there. Tonight, we are talking about Man and Superman. Superman is one of my favorite comic book heroes, along with the many others, but Superman I've loved for a very long time. And Arlen is going to take us into a history of Superman that I am so looking forward to seeing, and we thought we'd bring it to you guys. So we're here on Google Hangouts on Wednesday nights with Arlen. This is our second to last one because he has an exhibition at Art on a Gallery, which is on the Lower East Side of New York City. And if you cannot come to New York before June 5th, which is a week from tomorrow, you're missing his live lectures. His live lectures in the gallery space are Thursday evenings. So we're here bringing them to you Wednesday evenings here on Google Hangout, just a preview, but so informative as well because he's terrific with his information. So Arlen, Art on a Gallery, first tell us about the gallery show. Just give us a brief history, why you're there, what's happening.
Well, it's a great little gallery in the East Village, which is my old neighborhood. I used to live in that part of the city. And I've never had an exhibition of my art because I was always more of a commercial artist and illustrator. And the idea of having my art in a fine art gallery setting was always just something I didn't spend too much time thinking about because I didn't operate in that world. But I met Grace Perez, the curator gallery of the Art on a Gallery, and Rick Rocket, and they came to a group show that I participated in. And lo and behold, she said she liked my work best in the group show, and she invited me to have my own show at the gallery. So taking my art out of its commercial art illustration context, like something I might have done for a magazine cover, now that you frame it without the type and put it in a gallery setting, it all of a sudden takes on the context of a fine art show. And the way I order the images and group them and the statements I'm making implicit in the art itself is something that I took very seriously, and it's really a retrospective of my whole career as an artist and a graphic designer. There's images that I did for Bruce Springsteen's Darkness Tour in 1978 that are legendary amongst Bruce fans. There's a canvas of Elvis, my one Elvis image, that I collaborated on with a friend I went to Rhode Island School of Design with 30 years ago. So, so it's my comics history work, my illustration, similar to the stuff that's behind me, but by me, not by the artists whom I love, that I surround myself with in my Batman cave. But tonight, it's the Fortress of Solitude because I'm wearing my custom Superman cape. You see,
Let's see it. Oh, yeah.
Now, this was a belt buckle that I brought to the hardware store. I got the chain, and then I brought it to a seamstress and had it sewn on, so it gives it that Roman centurion look you want in a man's evening cape, as I like to call it.
A man's evening cape.
A man's evening cape. Hey, I'm bringing the man's evening cape back. Tomorrow night I'll be wearing it with a black, suit jacket. You dress it up a little, and it takes on a whole new context. So so what a perfect lead-in. Are we ready to begin my Man and Superman show?
Yes, cannot wait.
You got it. Here we go. Yes, Superman, there he is. An icon. The greatest 20th century comic book character of all time. But tonight, it's not just about Superman. It's about my relationship to Superman It's what I call Man and Superman. And what you're going to see tonight is not a hoax. It's not a dream. It's not an imaginary story. This is a little preview of the gallery talk I'll be giving at Arlen Gallery tomorrow. And tonight on Google Hangout, you're going to see it first. It all starts when I'm a kid in summer camp. There I am, 5.5 years old. And what's down at my feet but a comic book? And what comic book was it? The very first comic book I can remember seeing was this issue, 1963, Superman's 25th anniversary. And it was a special issue because, as you can see, there's a combination of the black and white line art in the background, but this beautiful wash tone over the Superman figure, making him look like a silver statue. And something about this figure just burned its way into my brain, and that was Superman by the great artist Curt Swan, my first favorite artist as a kid. Right around that time, DC Comics and Aurora Models marketed the first sort of superhero action figure, this model kit. And this was the back cover ad showing the artist Curt Swan actually about the model story itself. Here's another ad that DC Comics ran. And the reason why I'm showing you this is right after I was exposed to Superman, that model kit came out. And then the next year in summer camp, this was a postcard drawing I sent back to my mother at home. And I'm like 7 years old here. And
Oh, how cute.
that's the picture that I sent. And obviously, other kids were writing back, you know, dear mom and dad, send candy. This is what I was sending. And here's a photograph off of eBay of the actual model, not made by me, by somebody else. But, you know, my brother and I must have bought 50 of those and made them over and over again, trying to get them right. There's the box cover of the Superman model kit, and even the illustration there that they did is based on the George Reeves television Superman that I grew up with really through reruns, and it's the Superman that basically is the Superman of the 20th century that most lay people think of. But he wasn't, of course, the first media Superman. Before him, there was this actor, Kirk Allen, in the black and white serials that were shown in movie theaters. He was actually the second cinema Superman. The first one was animated, the Max Fleischer Superman cartoon, based very closely on the Joe Shuster original, which comes out in 1938. This cartoon image is from 1940. Here's a 1939 comic by Joe Shuster, the artist and co-creator of Superman. He debuts a year earlier in Action Comics #1. This should be a familiar icon to everybody. When you go in close to Superman's costume as it's first drawn, you could see that the shield, the S, has the shape of like a badge, a piece of armor, and you can see it has that resemblance. But look at Superman's boots, and the outfit is basically modeled after that of the circus strongman at the time. That was the muscular man who performed deeds. And you could see in this shot, very rare, of an actor that Joe Shuster had dressed up so he could draw Superman. And this guy, I believe, is the same guy in this photograph at the 1939 World's Fair on a float. This image is an actor dressed up as Superman. It's really Superman's first public appearance as an actor, as a living being. And there he is in a rare, very rare color shot. When you go up to the chess symbol, look at the original, or one of the original chess symbols translated from the comic book S that went through a bit of a metamorphosis over the years. In the early years, it kind of looked like that. Look how the Fleischers interpreted it, with a black background. By the time we get to the George Reeves Superman in the 50s, it's assumed it's modern shape. But I think the Kurt Swan Superman of the baby boom generation, he drew Superman from 1958 to 1986. His Superman is the Superman that's lodged in the generation of fans who grew up on Superman. It's his S that became the standardized Superman S, which I've got to believe is one of the most recognizable logo icon images of the 20th century, perhaps only rivaled by its doppelganger, Hitler's Nazi symbol.
Wow.
Also the greatest 20th century logo ever created. And talk about rebranding. If you know the history of the swastika, you know that Hitler totally rebranded an ancient pagan fertility symbol. Whereas the Superman S is the Nazi symbol's direct polar opposite, to the point where it can withstand and mix messages of truth, justice, and the American way, seen in this image that conflates Superman with America, which is part of the theme that I'm going to go into in tonight's talk. In fact, recently the Superman S, as seen in the recent film from a year ago, actually made it into an icon from Kryptonian times that actually stood for something, and they literalized it as hope, as verbalized by the Superman character. Very much picked up on one of the original S's with its serifs there, but again, I like the Kurt Swan Superman S for its balance of positive and negative space. And seen here in the icon of the Clark Kent Superman shirt opening image, which itself has become an icon that I've used as an illustrator many times in my career. This is the close-up of an image used for a financial trade magazine, and obviously very easy to turn the Superman S into the dollar sign. It's also what I used for my first talk at the gallery a couple of weeks ago. That's basically an overview of the work in the gallery that I call Life Art and Comic Book Art. I thought that this was the perfect image of mine to be the poster image, because having an art show at an art gallery summons up ideas and images of the whole idea of fine art and how much money paintings go for and what is art worth and what is art. So I thought this image representing what my background is and also making a comment on the art scene was apropos. Here's the full image as I've ended up using it over and over many times. It got its start as a commercial illustration that I did that looked like this, and after I did this, I realized that I had done a pretty classic Clark Kent shirt opening image. So that image I've been able to resell as stock illustration to have many uses, to the point where I basically say to potential clients, here, you know, you stick anything on the chest and it becomes an icon. I recently helped out a hospice organization called Superheroes for Hospice, and they sell comic books like a little mini conventions in order to raise money for hospice in New Jersey. So I actually took the Superman S and inverted it and made it the hospital sign, and now it looks like a little house symbol. And that's how I ended up using, and the whole idea was be a superhero for hospice. So we're all heroes underneath the skin. In my show, here's an image that I've done that had many uses now, and now in an art gallery setting, it sends its own message. It was originally used for promoting a series of lectures that I did on comic book art in the 1960s at the CUNY Grad Center in New York City. It was a 4-session series in 2002. And it's the idea that the superheroes of the 60s went from establishment to counterculture, and the art itself and the stories in the 60s perfectly mirrored what was happening in that decade at the time. I've always used this Clark Kent image in my advertising and editorial design work, way back when Adweek had a story about how the networks have to turn into kind of super salesmen in order to compete with cable. Well, this image then suggested itself.
What year was that?
That was 1989
Huh, interesting.
for Adweek, yeah.
So could you do, I guess, what would be the current version of that?
In what sense?
Well, TV competing against cable. Now cable is competing against digital.
Ah, well, there you go.
Ah.
So who knows? But yeah, I could see putting that one together. Absolutely. Here's another thing I did the same year, 1989, called Super Fraud, and it's all about how in the Andy Warhol collection, a comic book friend of mine, Rich Shinehouse, and I both discovered fraudulent images in the Warhol collection. Now, let me just do a little sidetracking here. We all know about Andy Warhol from his soup cans and that silkscreen look, but unless you're a real Warholian, or a real comic book historian, you may not know that Warhol started out his fine art career in 1960-61 painting comic book panels like this.
Oh.
Here's the Batman logo. These date 60 and 61. And what happened was, after Warhol did these, he was invited to go over to the studio. Oh, here's another one Warhol did, of Popeye. Anyway, he was invited to go to the studio of a peer artist named Roy Lichtenstein, who was doing his versions, like this on the left, of comic book panels and others. And when Warhol saw these in 61, 62, he said, you know what, he's doing it better than I am. And that's what made Warhol end up doing his soup cans, was putting down comics. But over the years, Warhol never left his love of comics behind, and later in his career, in the 80s, he produced this silkscreen. So then Warhol dies in 87, and in 1989, the Museum of Modern Art gives him his first major retrospective. And in the book that I pick up, the catalog resume, there's one of these collages that I put here on the right, and I had never seen these before, and they were small. They were like 8.5 by 11, and they weren't paintings of the comic book panels like Warhol did in 1661. They were just actual cut-out panels pasted on the canvas and then splattered with paint. But they're dated 1960-61. And I'm thinking, that's odd. Why? Because there's the comic book that the images are from, except I remember reading these Superman comics when I was a kid. That image on the left is from 1969. There's no way these collages could have been made in 1961. So whoever made them, whether it was Warhol himself, and we all know he had his mother sign his art, or one of his factory stooges, or who knows, they purposely dated the art thinking that no one would know. Nobody cares about comics. Nobody's going to know that these are from 1969. And they're in the catalog resume. So I contacted a friend of mine, and he had discovered them at the same time, and his sister wrote for the San Francisco Chronicle, and she did this article showing how these might be fakes. And I took it upon myself to create that illustration, and I went around to the New York media world, and I tried to get all the major media outlets to cover the story, and nobody would. And I think the suspicion I got was they might have Warhols on their own wall, and if exposing that these could be fakes and forgeries might cast a dim light on their works, but I'll never know that. But it's interesting that the gallery that supplied these to the Museum of Modern Art, the Robert Miller Gallery, quietly removed those collages from the traveling exhibition, and they were never shown again. But the bottom line is, if you pick up that Museum of Modern Art retrospective, those frauds are in there. And it speaks to this idea that comic books have never been given the same critical analysis in the fine art and straight media world. And that's what I've been, in a sense, crusading my whole life and career doing. And it's funny, I've always done takeoffs on the Superman image and the Superman logo. This was for Publishers Weekly, also done the same year as the Warhol and Adweek images. Look at that Summer Announcements logo, and here's the very first Superman logo in 1939. And you can see how it's very crude compared to 6 months later, when the great letterer at DC Comics named Ira Schnapp created and refined the telescopic Superman lettering, which I maintain is as recognizable and as beautiful as the Coca-Cola logo in terms of it being an identifiable icon. Here it is finished on the George Reeves television show. This was all lettered by this guy, Ira Schnapp, who worked for DC Comics for over 30 years and ended up designing all the graphics and images that became icons in recognizing the look of comics. Not only that DC Bullet logo, but also, you see that little approved by the Comics Code Authority stamp that was in the upper right corner of all the comics? Ira Schnapp designed that. There's the DC Comics Bullet logo, which has long been an influence on me, to the point where a year ago I designed my own logo as a spoof on that to get across the projects that I've been doing my whole career and continue to do. And it all comes out of my love for the lettering of Ira Schnapp at DC Comics. All of that lettering in this house ad is done by hand, and I really think it's some of the most beautiful lettering of the 20th century. Ira Schnapp was the guy that lettered all the DC logos of the 1960s that have become known as the Silver Age of comics. Pretty much beginning with The Flash in 1956, this image considered the first Silver Age comic book character that kicked off the rebirth of superheroes in the modern era. Those logos, and every DC Comics logo you can think of, were hand lettered by an Eastern European immigrant Jew named Ira Schnapp. He came from Europe and Sasau, in this area of Eastern Europe where Poland and Russia overlapped there. And he came from a family of stonecutters, the Schnapps, and there is the ancient arms. And you could see that some of that regal feeling of his Eastern European roots ended up penetrating in Ira Schnapp's work when he comes to this country. One of the first jobs he gets is for the United States Post Office, the one on 34th Street and 7th Avenue in New York City. And if you look up at the classic Roman stone-cut letters, neither rain nor sleet nor snow, that classic, those are designed by Ira Schnapp, and nobody knows it. The same guy that designed this designed that. This is America, baby. People don't realize that not only did Ira Schnapp do that for Superman, but he designed all the pows and the zaps of the Batman TV show that have themselves become icons in not only the world of comics, but among laymen as well. He did in the 1960s, along with the Batman TV show logos, a long series of house ads for DC's other comics that were just beautiful examples of energetic, exciting hand lettering. I've given lectures on this at the Type Directors Club in New York City, but he made letters and ideas come alive. When you read that phrase, just imagine, just the way he letters it, the way he angles the exclamation point, the big initial cap J, it's both pop culture and it's classic type. Look at this beautiful hand-lettered ad for that very first comic book that I saw, the 25th anniversary Superman annual. People watching this that know about typography, other graphic designers, know that this is just impeccable hand lettering. And it was such an influence on me growing up, and a lot of artists and designers that grew up reading comics. And look at that silver statue. I ended up paying homage to that. This is the last page of my book, The Silver Age of Comic Book Art, in a couple of pages about Kurt Swan, the artist, and how statues were a recurring motif in his work. There's the cover to my book that came out in 2003. It's a coffee table art book, but it went out of print in 2005, and if all goes well, I'll be bringing it back in a revised edition later this summer in both print and digital. There's my preface, and I talk about how I came to do a comic book art history book that really had never been done before. And there in the center of the page is an image that I did in 1992, and it was for a graphic design trade magazine called Print. And every month they gave a back page that they called the design scene to a graphic designer illustrator to make their comment on whatever the design scene meant. So this was me addressing the art world, the graphic design world, the art direction world, as a kind of a hobo Superman in the middle of Times Square in the crucifix position, holding out comics saying, comic books are books, comic books are art, comic books are graphic design. Why won't you listen to me? And that's kind of what I've been doing my whole career. And interesting, tonight I'm on a whole new medium, these Google Hangouts, so people are listening to me now in different ways that I never could have foreseen 20 plus years ago when I created that image. That's the cover of Print Magazine's special issue on comics that came out in 1988 that I was the that I was the instigator of. I designed the cover of the issue, which says the word comics. You can see the COMICS, and the images inside pertain to the stories inside the issue, the colors, red, yellow, and blue, the primary colors of comics, and even the design, the 6 panels to a page, comic book page is like a window pane design, and the world of comics is literally looking through the world a different way, the world of words and pictures. My article for the issue, here's the opening double-page spread, and it was really a retrospective overview of how the graphics in comics had transformed since the 1960s. And there on the right side is an image in white and black of Superman that's done by the great artist Neil Adams, a big influence on me, an entire generation, who brought in a very realistic look to comic book art, where if you look at the images below of Jack Kirby and Frank Miller and Walt Simonson, was much more stylized. Neil Adams represents the other approach of more realistic anatomy. Here we are 25 years ago, and I'm still using that Neil Adams image. This is an upcoming verbal visual essay I'm doing for an anthology book about comics coming out later this fall called A1. And it's a 8.5 by 11 hardcover book. And I'm doing a 10-page verbal visual essay where I'm basically talking about the relationship between fine art and comic book art, in the sense that if you show these two images to aliens who didn't have the burden of 500 years of art history, I think they might more fairly evaluate what I see in my eyes as two equivalent works of art showing the idealized male heroic anatomy. And I don't see there being any real difference in greatness between the two. I happen to think that Neil Adams Superman image is the greatest single drawing of Superman ever created. And therefore its proportions as a Superman are equivalent to the way we talk about Michelangelo's David. Here's the first 2 pages of the article in which I begin this overview of how comics have cross-pollinated with the fine art world. And if you look at the image on the left, that's in the background, that's the very first pop art image done by an English artist in 1956. And it's considered the first work of pop art. because he peppered his composition with all kitschy type elements. Look at the weightlifter guy on the left. He's holding a Tootsie Pop, and that's one of the reasons why people started calling it pop art. But there on the wall in the background is a Young Romance comic book cover done by the team of Jack Kirby and Joe Simon. And right from the beginning, comics and pop art are inextricably linked. Look at the bottom left. I show you the Warhol image and its comic book origins by the DC artist Kurt Schaffenberger. And over on the right, Lichtenstein and how he incorporated comic book panels. If you look in the center, I talk about how Mel Ramos, another early pop artist, started painting figures of Superman and Batman. And this brings up an interesting point that I try to make when I'm discussing the relationship between fine art and comic book art, is that invariably the fine art is always a lesser version of its original. Look at the figure Ramos paints a year after the comic book comes out, and I'll take the Kurt Swan figure there over the somewhat flaccid Mel Ramos figure. Yes, giggle away. It's meant to be giggled at. No offense. No offense to Mel Ramos, but give me Kurt Swan. Speaking of museums, this is a picture of the Words and Pictures Museum that existed for a couple of years in Northampton, Massachusetts, funded by the guy that did the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. He was one of a partnership, and he used his money to open up this beautiful museum dedicated to comic book art. And in 1998, I did a 60th anniversary exhibition of what I call the art history of Superman. These were 55-inch by 27-inch panels hung in the gallery, explaining in a verbal, visual way what I call the art history of Superman. So we start with, you know, the first artist, Joe Shuster, the co-creator, and how Superman looked, and pretty much each decade has its own Superman artist. But in the 40s, you have the Max Fleischer Superman cartoons, which have become very influential in the world of realistic animation. If you look closely, I include an image of the Batman animated series by Bruce Timm that carry the Fleischer influence into the modern era. In the 1950s, the artist Wayne Boring became the archetypal Superman artist. But look at Superman's posture in the center. This was, again, you can see the origins of the circus strongman body and the barrel-chested, you know, hero of that type before the whole weightlifting regime took over. The barrel-chested strongman was the look, and Wayne Boring embodied that in the 1950s Superman. But then you get Kurt Swan representing the 1960s, and I still believe, like many, that his is the Superman for all time. Following him in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, you've got the Neil Adams realistic Superman on the left. You've got John Byrne, who is an Adams influencee, doing his version after they've kind of forcibly retired Kurt Swan in 1986. And then in the 90s, Alex Ross brings fully painted comics, realistically done, into the comic book world. And he was influenced by Neil Adams, but he brings them out of pen and ink and into painting. And his Superman is very realistic. Looks like, if they could only find an actor who looks like that, that would be your greatest cinematic Superman. Alex Ross has taken all the DC and Marvel heroes, and he actually hires real-life models and gets costumes made and actually pays, like Norman Rockwell did, from these models. And you could see the influence of Alex Ross in the way comics are translated into the live-action world. But particularly his treatment of Superman has always given him the more godlike aspects of the character. And it's therefore easy to see how the influence of the Superman made it into the recent cinematic version by Zack Snyder that came out last year. And you can see the godlike, Christ-like aspects of this work that not only they imbued in the Superman movie, but that Alex Ross had been working with for years prior. So it's easy to see how Superman is the Christ figure in comic book form. Goes back to his origins. For Jor-El so loved the earth, he gave his only begotten son with powers and abilities far beyond those of mortal men, that he might save the earth. In 1966, a pastor wrote this book talking about Superman's sort of Christian origins and being this benevolent savior with powers to actually do miracles. And when you see this idea carried over in a more kitsch way, whether it's directly like this, Jesus Christ as superstar, Superman, the original superhero in a way, but indirectly in the comic books themselves, DC Comics has treated Superman as a Christ figure, whether intentional or not. Do I have to even say more about this particular image by the great DC Comics artist Nick Cardy? But on the other hand, when you go back to Superman's earliest origins, this is from the very first issue and the origin of Superman. He's a champion of the oppressed, very Christ-like in that conception, but at the same time, devoting his existence to helping those in need. There's a very Hamish aspect, as Christ, as being Jewish himself, of course, comes from the line of Judaism that stresses justice and compassion and democracy, and therefore writers have been talking about Superman as really being of Jewish origins. Obviously, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, the creators, were both Jewish. Jules Feiffer, in his book The Great Comic Book Heroes, that came out in 1965, said that Superman is not from Krypton, he's from the planet Minsk, meaning that Siegel and Shuster created this ultimate American assimilationist screed about leaving Europe, which was blowing up, and coming to America and starting this new life. So you can see the Moses roots of Superman in the fact that he's jettisoned from a world where he would have met destruction, just like Moses is jettisoned from the Pharaoh's decree to kill all the firstborn Hebrews and is discovered and raised by the Pharaoh's daughter. Now, I think I got that right. And of course, Moses, seen in this picture, is a super heroic character, and Superman therefore carries some of that trait forward. But he's also like the biblical strongman Samson, shown here in this classic image. So it's not a stretch to see how Superman, very early on in 1939, is shown here busting through the chains that keep you down, the chains of oppression. So it's not that big of a leap to go from an image like that to an image like this, where Superman would basically save us from the ills of the age. And this appears in 1941, 42, just as we're going... Excuse me?
Or 10 cents.
Oh, yeah. Comics started as 10 cents. They went to 12 cents in 1961, and they've been going up since. But, hey, Time magazine used to be 10 cents, too, and it's no longer that. So, Superman and all the superheroes, when they started, became linked to World War II and to the American dream and to the American cause. And it's in images like this of 1942 that forever locked in this idea of superheroes representing America. Meanwhile, a year before this image, Jack Kirby and Joe Simon create Captain America in March of 41, almost a year before we go into the war, as a way of raising America's consciousness to go into battle. So Captain America is like Superman and Uncle Sam sort of grafted together. I do a whole lecture on this that I call Jews and Comics, and it goes to the whole history of how all of those superheroes, most of them, like Batman, etc., were created by first-generation American Jews that were unconsciously and subconsciously creating heroes to come and save us from the rising world threat of Nazism and fascism. And
Wow.
I'm going through this whole history, going back to the Golem myth. But that character is my own character, Captain Israel, that I created years ago, back in 2002 during the Second Intifada, and ended up getting him published in a couple of issues with this pro-Israel organization called Stand With Us. This was in 2010. And you can see in the issue, this is maybe the first ever pro-Israeli army image I think ever created. And the panels individually show in 8 pages of Captain Israel 1 how Israel came to be. And then you can see how I took Captain Israel right from the iconography of Captain America. Jack Kirby and Joe Simon created him. Kirby's real name, Yaakov Kurtzberg. So 2 American Jews create Captain America to raise the consciousness of what was happening in Europe. 1 American Jew, me, creates Captain Israel to try to raise the consciousness of what's going on over there in today's world as well. I created Captain Israel the same year, or right about the time, this other battlefield happened, and this is the crash site of Flight 93 on September 11th, 2001. The reason why I'm showing this is because after 9/11, a lot of the pundits started talking about where are the comic book superheroes in the face of a real crisis. And this happens every now and then, and they totally miss the point of what superheroes are supposed to be. Of course they're not real, you idiots. They're meant to inspire us to act heroically. So I was listening to one of these pundits on a radio show, and they mentioned that the widow of one of the people that died on Flight 93 had a Superman tattoo on his shoulder. And I thought to myself, you know, if this guy had a Superman tattoo on his shoulder, I bet you not only did he participate in the revolt on the plane that ended up saving the lives of countless others, but maybe he even led the charge, and his name was Louis Nackey. And after this radio show, I got an email from the Society of Illustrators in New York. They wanted to create a memorial exhibition of artworks about 9/11. So I contacted Nackey's widow. She sent me this picture, and I ended up turning Louis Nackey into Superman as my contribution to the 9/11 exhibition. And the legend in the scroll down below talks about how while I was working on this art, I went to a comic convention and I picked up an old issue of Superman from 1966, and somebody from England wrote this in the letters column, and he said, Superman is not just a fictional comic character, he is a symbol of all that is good in America. And I couldn't believe I was given that quote while I was working on this art, because that's exactly the sentiment I was trying to portray. And there's something of this image where a man would lay down his life for his friends is similar to one of Jesus Christ's own greatest sayings, is that no greater gift can a man give his friends than to lay down his life for them. So when I did my image of Jesus, I tried to do a classic image of Jesus. I added the comic book dots to kind of put it in my style. But I really based it on the classic 1940s Warner Stallman image that's become one of the most reproduced images on the planet, and more people get their image of Jesus from this image really than from any other. So I kind of paid homage to it when I did this version. But as we travel from the original superhero to a more current superhero, when I was asked to do a Christmas card, this is the image I came up with, and here's how it's hanging in the gallery. But there's the images that I used when it was a card, and it says Santa Claus Comics Group, which was like the DC logo. And then in the upper right corner, it's approved by the Christmas Card Authority. So I've always liked to use comics to play with the Superman idea that my Santa's not some old fat guy. He's a super Santa. He's working out, kicking butt, and taking names. But every now and then I've gotten the chance to actually do Superman as opposed to just doing sort of homages or spoofs or parodies of Superman. This is actually the flat art to a three-dimensional pop-up card. Here's a photograph of it, how it hangs in the gallery when you come to see it. And it was done for this company, Pop Shots, and it shows how I had to design the art and work with these Japanese origami masters who could figure out how to turn flat art into a three-dimensional pop-up. Pretty fascinating. And over the years in magazines, I've gotten the chance to draw Superman, like in this double-page spread illustration for Entertainment Weekly back in the early 2000s when there was a rumor of a Superman-Batman movie. Of course, here we are a dozen years later, and they're actually making the Superman-Batman movie. So it was a long time coming. Something for the New York Times. I got to do Superman, Wonder Woman, the cinematic Batman. There's Spider-Man in the background. Whenever I've gotten to do Superman, I always go back to that great Kurt Swan Superman for my influence. So for this Time magazine double-page spread, I actually used this Kurt Swan Superman panel. And it's the Kurt Swan Superman I return to time and time again. This image is a double-page spread from a 1966 comic that DC Comics put out. And it's the image that I used many years later when I did, for Comics History trade book biography of Kurt Swan, a 16-page color section where I got to write and design a retrospective of Kurt Swan's Superman art. The opening double-page spread shows how all the icons you associate with Superman, the flying positions themselves, were perfected by Kurt Swan. The images of the Fortress of Solitude, Supergirl, his family, Lois Lane, those are all the kind of traffic signs for Superman. But at the same time, as the first realistic artist of DC Comics, really in the early 60s, he was able to portray many emotions and wasn't just one cardboard version of Superman. He also drew Superman in very tender positions that belied that of a superheroic figure. If you look in the lower right of Superman comforting another fallen superhero, you can see that it wasn't just this macho superheroic side. There was a quiet contemplative side to Kurt Swan's Superman, as shown in this double-page spread of these images that I just find fascinating, that even though nothing superheroic is going on, you get so much beauty and power and a softness in these images that you wouldn't associate with the greatest of all superheroes. Look at the lower right image of Superman crying. Good luck if you're an artist trying to pull that off. But Kurt Swan did. When he died in 1996, I delivered a slideshow eulogy at a meeting of the National Cartoonist Society. This is a video on YouTube that you can go to. You can access it from my website of the slideshow, pre-computer, by the way. And Swan's children and ex-wife were in the audience. And when it was over, they came up to me in tears and thanking me for the job I had done. But how could I have not when he was my first favorite artist at a time when DC Comics didn't even credit the artists and writers? For years, growing up, we didn't know that the guy that drew our favorite Superman was named Kurt Swan. And it was the editor that Swan worked with his whole career, a man named Mort Weisinger, who's really the behind-the-scenes kind of wizard behind the curtain of the baby boomer Superman. He was the editor of Superman from 1940 to 1970. He shepherded the TV show. Everything the layman knows about Superman comes from the mind of this man, Mort Weisinger, who is a controversial character in the history of comics. The comics he produced, the Superman family of comics, were the #1 selling comics for DC Comics for years. They were the Coca-Cola, the Cadillac of DC Comics. And he was the man in charge. So the ideas, the stories, the style, the look of Superman, the other characters came out of his mind. He was the editor who shepherded Curt Swan into the lead role as the great Superman artist. So I tried to do a project that mixed the influences of Curt Swan and Mort Weisinger when I did a verbal visual essay a couple of years ago called Requiem for Weisinger, and it was using Curt Swan's images and anything I could find that Mort Weisinger, oh, by the way, there's the comic that I based my cover on. And if you look closely at the bottom of my image, featuring the wit, the whimsy, and wisdom of Weisinger, that's what his stories were about. They were equal parts of all those things, and they were the types of comics that some people hated because they thought they were juvenile. Other people to this day have warm memories of stories and emotions that literally changed their life. And there's that picture of Weisinger, and in my credit I talk about how I ended up telling the story in Weisinger's own words through articles, interviews, very little, but whatever I could find I used. And then I interviewed his own son, Hank Weisinger, who's now a psychologist in his mid-60s, and he gave me insight into his own father. So in this opening double-page spread, you could see how I merged the photograph with the drawing of Superman, and I tried to show in these images the wit, whimsy, and wisdom of Weisinger. The typeset type is Hank talking about his father, and the comic book type is Weisinger himself. So of course I show a double-page spread of all the icons that became the baby boomer Superman, and everything from the Krypton ship leaving the doomed planet to Supergirl, the Fortress of Solitude, all the characters, Legion of Superheroes, Jor-El on the right, his Superman family, Lois, Lana, Perry White, Jimmy Olsen. Curt Swan, as an artist, was able to go from the sacred to the profane. There's the whimsy and there is the wisdom of Weisinger in one double-page spread. How do you go from an image of Superman looking like What Me Worry Alfred E. Newman of Mad Magazine to that beautiful, sensitive image on the right? And when you read what Weisinger actually had to say about these types of stories, you really can see how Superman presented this entire spectrum of stories that were goofy. If you look at the images inset on the left, Superman turns into a lion, a guy with an ant head, a Godzilla character, a merman, you know, I mean, and yet you have the images on the right. In my verbal visual essay, I also talk about how within the comics there was a love triangle between Lois, Clark, and Superman, but not quite love, because Clark Kent, according to Weisinger, was secretly jealous of Superman because Weisinger himself, as a man, was jealous of Superman in the sense that he felt his whole identity was that he was the editor of Superman, that nobody cared about who he was. So he imbued some of that into the comics themselves. This art is not Photoshop put together art. That image of Superman and Clark as Siamese twins is found art. And the fact that Clark Kent is on a psychiatrist's couch mirrors the real-life Mort Weisinger going to a psychiatrist to deal with the fact that he felt that he was subsumed by his Superman persona, to the point where I end the verbal visual essay on when Weisinger finally left at the peak of his career in 1970 to prove to himself that he could survive without Superman. And he lived as a freelance writer for another 8 years, and then he died very early, I mean, another 5 years, and he died very early at the age of 63. And to this day, a very controversial character, because the people that worked with him, he was a bit of a tyrant, but the fans that didn't know the behind the scenes either loved or some didn't love his comics. But to this day, his Superman is still the classic Superman, that will stand the test of time. I took that image from one of the classic Kurt Swan Superman covers in 1967 that mirrored, once again, Weisinger's own feelings about leaving Superman. So somehow those ideas and concepts made it into the actual comics themselves. And since this image bespeaks of man and Superman, it's only fitting that we come full circle to this, my one-page autobiography, that's actually the last page in my book, The Silver Age of Comic Book Art. If you look up close, you can see I worked in the images from my summer camp comic experience, the postcard, my idea of what Mount Rushmore should look like. And I talk about how my mother was a widow. My father died when I was 4 months old. She sent my brother and I a summer camp very early so that we would get male role models. But instead, the role models I discovered were superheroes. This is an image I found on Facebook. Maybe somebody did it, was influenced by what I did. But you can see the comic book in my hand is that very first Superman comic book I saw. And as I got older, that image in the lower left corner, that's me in 8th grade doing an oral report on the lawsuit between DC Comics suing Captain Marvel for copyright infringement when I was 14 years old in 8th grade. And then in the bottom right corner, there's me when I had a goatee. And I talk about how the debt I owe, one of the greatest American art forms, can never fully be repaid. And I end with a quote that a friend of mine gave me years ago and said, Arlen, this is you. And it said, a man's work is nothing but the slow trek to rediscover through the detours of art those 2 or 3 great and simple images in whose presence his heart first opened. Thank you, guys. This has been Man and Superman. Not a hoax, not a dream, not an
imaginary story.
And if you notice the type on this image down below, I'll be doing this talk live in the gallery tomorrow, and it'll also be a live streamed video. If you go to artonagallery.com, it'll be right there starting at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and then archived. And there's the window of the gallery with my Super Money Man image in the window. Here's a shot of the gallery during the opening and the way my art is around the walls. It's a small gallery. It's like a railroad apartment in Manhattan. But it's big enough for my art, and I'm very happy and proud to be there. Of course, everything is for sale, ladies and gentlemen. There's a store in the back that sells beautiful rock and roll jewelry and clothing items, and it's very, very cool. So if you come to the city, check it out. And here's how we do the lectures. They drape a screen right in the center of the gallery and set up chairs. Here's me lecturing about that art and comic book art verbal visual essay that I'm presently working on. Here's a close-up of me doing the first of the lectures, Life Art and Comic Book Art, back on May 8th. There's, of course, the image. Then a week later, I gave a gallery talk about the unsung co-creator, uncredited of Batman, Bill Finger, who was Bob Kane's writing partner, without whom Batman would have looked like the character that I illustrated behind the lettering. If Bill Finger hadn't made the suggestions that made Batman Batman, he would have ended up looking like that. Here's me in my Batman mask that I got off of eBay. It's supposedly one of Adam West's stuntmen's mask. Who knows?
Wow.
But there's me lecturing on the Bill Finger talk. And next week, so tomorrow night is Man and Superman at the gallery. And then next Thursday, I'll be winding up my gallery show with my last lecture based on my book, The Silver Age of Comic Book Art, which will also be the basis for the series of live interactive web talks that I'll be giving with you guys, Midnight Media Capture, starting in the fall. That will coincide with the republishing of my book, The Silver Age of Comic Art, in both print and digital forms. So with that, I will turn the image, if I'm doing this correctly, back to me. Did I do that right?
There you are.
Ta-da!
That was very informative.
There you go. Right on time, too. Look at my timing. Impeccable, I might add.
Arlen, that was incredible. I learned so much as usual in your artwork. It was so beautiful. I loved revisiting the images of. I mean, we all just need our own superhero. It seems like so inspiring. We're so grateful to have Arlen with us this fall at Midnight Media Capture, midnightmediacapture.com. Visit us there for more. I was asking online if anyone had questions for Arlen. We didn't see anything written, but I'm sure you're just soaking it all in as we are here. It was just fantastic.
It's always TMI when you come to me. I always give you more, but I try to make it edutainment. Educational, and I try to make it as entertaining visually and verbally, I'd like to think, as possible.
Arlen, where can they reach you if they want to directly email you?
Definitely come to my website, arlenschumer.com. Make sure you spell it S-C-H-U-M-E-R, like Chuck Schumer. Not related, but who knows, maybe we are. And my first name, Arlen, A-R-L-E-N. And from there, you can email me. You can access pretty much my whole career is on my website. And go to Art on a Gallery, definitely, for information about the gallery, where it is, down in the East Village, and the live stream video, and all that other stuff.
Yes, Arlen's own illustrations are for sale at Art on a Gallery, and I believe he's also for hire as a graphic artist. If you want to personalize some comic book style images, I mean, he's amazing and whipping these things out every day. So I'm getting my order together.
Yeah.
I love it. I definitely want my one-page bio.
Hey, done and done.
Yeah, wonderful.
I could turn you into a superstar.
Well, I'm already Lois Lane, so let's take it.
Well, no, but this is different. I call it, what I do, I call it finding your inner superhero.
I love it. I love it. Okay, any last thoughts, Giovanna, Arlen, Giovanna?
No, I'm pretty good. I'm just excited to have you, Arlen. I love comic books. I love the superhero story. And look forward to next week's Hangout, too.
Yep. We do have one more Hangout next week, Wednesday. It'll be our last one as we say so long to Arlen's Google Hangouts with us, in-person lectures at the gallery. But we are previewing through these Hangouts what it'll be like to be with Arlen in the fall on Midnight Media Capture. So thank you so much, everyone.
You want the truth? You can't handle the truth.
And there's a lot of truth yet to be told.
Are people ready for me? That's the question. I'm ready for them. Are they ready for me?
If we can handle you, Arlen, I think, yeah. We're the brave ones who jumped in first, I guess.
Hey, that's right. It's always the original ones that have the most courage. It should be the most rewarded.
There you go. I love rewards.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much, Arlen. We're going to say so long to everyone tonight. Please share this video and come back and see us next week. And if you're in New York, Art on a Gallery on Avenue A, there in the Lower East Side of New York City. It's a very special time. Thursday night lectures, in-person lectures with Arlen Schumer. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, Nicole. Bye, Giovanna.